To police officers pull over a black driver without cause, their suspicion boiling over. But when he calmly reveals who he really is, their faces tell a story of shock and regret. This isn't the stop they expected. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long golden rays that danced across the blacktop like ripples of heat. It was one of those summer afternoons where everything seemed to move a little slower, when the air felt thick, as if it carried secrets. The cicadas hummed lazily from the trees lining the road, and in the distance, the occasional chirp of birds broke through the silence like a soft melody. Malik Thompson gripped the leather steering wheel of his sleek black sedan with one hand, the other resting comfortably on the window frame. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, exposing a smooth watch, and a tatter just beneath it, a symbol of resilience inked in quiet tribute to his father. The car's air conditioning hummed low, offering relief from the heavy heat outside. Inside, the smooth rhythm of Coltrane's saxophone floated through the speakers, blending effortlessly with the sound of rubber tires gliding across asphalt. Malik's eyes, sharp and thoughtful, scanned the road ahead as he drove past a row of manicured lawns and white-fenced homes. The neighborhood whispered of quiet, privilege-trimmed hedges, SUVs in clean driveways, sprinklers clicking rhythmically over emerald grass. He had no business here, not in the way the locals might assume. But business wasn't why he was here. He didn't mind the stares he'd gotten at the gas station. 5 minutes earlier he'd grown used to that kind of glance. The kind that lingered just a second too long. The kind that asked silent questions. Why is he here? Is that car his? But Malik didn't flinch anymore. He just smiled, small, effortless, and quiet, like a man who'd learned long ago that dignity often whispers where pride shouts. With his back straight and his eyes steady, Malik exhaled and tapped the steering wheel lightly to the rhythm of the music. Jazz had always been his sanctuary, a language of the soul his mother introduced him to when he was just a boy, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor while she cooked and hummed along to Billie Holiday. Her voice came back to him now, as clear as the music playing. Never let them decide who you are, baby. Stay composed. The world's loud enough already. He smiled at the memory, soft and fond, and for a moment, the weight of the world slipped away. He wasn't an agent. He wasn't a target. He wasn't a statistic. He was just Malik. He turned down a tree-lined side road, slower now, eyes-taking. In the curve of the street ahead, the shadows of tall oaks stretched across the pavement like sleepy arms, and the gentle breeze sent a few stray leaves fluttering across his windshield. The scent of warm earth and faint cut grass drifted in through a barely cracked window. A child on a tricycle waved at him from a driveway, and Malik returned it with a subtle lift of his fingers, his smile never fading. It was the kind of afternoon that wrapped itself around you like a warm blanket, the kind that whispered, "Nothing bad happens here." But Malik knew better. He knew how quickly silence could turn to sirens. He knew how easily calm could twist into chaos, especially when you were a black man in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time, with the wrong assumptions following you like shadows. Still, he didn't let that thought linger. Today, he told himself, was just a drive, just another drive. He reached over to the passenger seat, tapped a small file folder, and nodded to himself. Assignment completed. He could head home now, make it in time for dinner. If the traffic played nice, he merged back onto the main road, where sunlight bounced sharply off his windshield. The cicadas still hummed, the sky still glowed a lazy blue, and the music still flowed like honey through the speakers. That was when he saw them dot far behind him. Two white headlights appeared, small at first, then growing steadily. A pair of red and blue flashes blinked once, then again. He watched in the mirror as they lit up the interior of his car in rhythmic bursts. The calm that had bathed the afternoon flickered for just a moment. Malik didn't curse, didn't sigh, didn't panic. He simply turned down the music, kept his hands in plain sight, and slowly pulled his car over to the side of the road. The cicadas sang louder now. Or maybe it was just the silence growing heavier. The red and blue lights pulsed in the rearview mirror like a warning shot through the comm. They bounced off Malik's face, flashing across his skin in bursts of artificial urgency. He blinked once slow, deliberate, and eased his car to the shoulder with practiced precision. He knew the drill. The tires crunched gently against the gravel as he came to a stop beneath the partial shade of an overhanging maple tree. Malik placed the car in park and kept both hands on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed, even as the muscles in his forearms tensed. He turned off the music. The cicadas filled the silence, their buzzing suddenly louder, more insistent, like nature itself was holding its breath. In the side mirror, he watched the police cruiser idle behind him. Two doors opened in near unison, and out stepped two officers, white, mid-40s, mirrored sunglasses masking their eyes, their uniforms crisp under the harsh afternoon sun. They didn't approach with the measured calm of civil inquiry. They marched. Boots scuffed the pavement with heavy purpose. One officer adjusted his belt, his thumb brushing the butt of his holstered weapon. The other rested a hand casually near his radio, eyes locked on Malik's car like it had no business being that polished, that expensive, that out of place. Malik exhaled once, soundless. The officer on the driver's side tapped the window twice, harder than necessary. Malik rolled it down. License and registration. The officer barked. No greeting, no explanation. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable behind the sunglasses. Malik nodded slowly, his voice even, carefully modulated. Of course, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop? The officer didn't respond. Instead, he glanced over Malik's shoulder at the dashboard, then back at him. Do what I said. Malik's hands stayed visible. He didn't reach immediately. My license is in my wallet, in my back pocket. Registration's in the glove box. I'm going to move slowly. The officer sneered. Don't get smart. The second officer now stood near the passenger window, peering in. This your car? He asked, his tone sharp with skepticism. Malik didn't answer right away. He retrieved his wallet slowly, then reached across the console with careful movements to retrieve the registration from the glove box. Yes, he said calmly. I own this vehicle. The first officer took the license and registration with a short, irritated motion. What are you doing in this neighborhood? The second officer pressed. Visiting someone. Malik met his gaze through the tinted lens. Just driving through. I had a meeting nearby, the officer scoffed. Meeting? And what kind of meeting was that? Malik didn't blink. Work-related. A beat of silence passed taut and uncomfortable. You work around here? The first officer returned, waving the license. Or is that just a story too? Discomfort now had teeth. It gnawed at the edges of Malik's composure, but he held fast. His breathing remained steady, though his pulse had begun to drum in. His ears a quiet, urgent rhythm in time with the flashing lights behind him. I work with the federal government, Malik replied, voice still even. They laughed short, dry, disbelieving. Yeah, doing what? Data entry. One of them snorted. Neither officer moved to run the ID. They hadn't checked the plates, hadn't explained the stop. They were circling him, sizing him up, like hunters who'd found a prize in unfamiliar territory. The second officer motioned, with his hand, step out of the vehicle. Malik hesitated, just long enough to register the escalation. Sir, I haven't been informed of any reason for this stop. I'd like to comply, but I also have rights. The first officer's tone turned sharp. Don't start quoting the Constitution at me. Out of the car. Now, something shifted in the air. The weight of tension grew heavier, pressing against the windows, the doors, the dashboard. Malik's hands remained on the wheel. His jaw clenched briefly, then relaxed. I'm remaining cooperative, he said, but I will not exit the vehicle without probable cause. The second officer's hand twitched near his holster. You resisting? That word hung in the air like a threat. Resisting. Malik's voice lowered, his calm deepening not from fear, but from resolve. I'm not resisting. I'm protecting myself. The first officer took a half-step closer. You people always think you're above the law. Malik's gaze sharpened slightly, But his tone didn't shift. "What people is that?" Silence. A thick, loaded pause. For the first time, Malik felt the stirrings of something darker, not just profiling, not just suspicion, but contempt, and with it, something else began to rise in him, not anger, but clarity, a sense that this was no misunderstanding. This was a performance, a power play, and he was meant to feel small. But Malik Thompson had spent years in rooms where being underestimated was the cost of admission. He had learned how to carry himself like silence, like steel hidden beneath a tailored suit. Now, he sat perfectly still, his breath even, his hands unmoving. The cicadas sang louder. Or maybe it was his heart, now hammering steadily in his chest, counting the seconds, waiting for the moment that would change everything. The sun had inched slightly lower, casting longer shadows that crept across the road like silent witnesses. The buzz of the cicadas still droned in the background, but now it felt more like a warning siren shrill, insistent, on edge. Malik could feel it that moment, the shift, the way time thickened when something was about to happen. Years of training had taught him to recognize it. And yet, nothing about this moment felt routine. The officer on his left adjusted his stance. His fingers hovered closer to the holstered weapon at his hip, thumb grazing the retention strap, his shoulders squared like a coiled spring. Malik's peripheral vision caught every movement, the twitch of a jaw muscle, the rise of a chest mid-breath. Then came the command, "Hands where I can see them." Now, they were already there. Both of Malik's hands rested calmly on the wheel, visible, open. Still, the officer's voice cut through the stillness again, louder now, cracking like a whip. "I said don't move." Malik didn't flinch. He knew better than to argue, but he also knew it was time. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled slow and deliberate. The kind of breath a man takes not to calm himself, but to remind the room he's in control of his own body, his own story. "I'm reaching into the glove compartment," he said clearly, without raising his voice. "I'm going to retrieve my identification." "Don't," the second officer shouted from the passenger side, hand halfway raised now. "Don't move, do you hear me?" But Malik had already begun. Slow, steady, intentional. His right hand left the steering wheel, or on smooth motion, fingers pointed, outward, non-threatening, empty, and moved toward the glove box. The first officer's hand twitched on his holster. "Stop. That's a lawful order." But Malik didn't stop. The latch clicked. The glove compartment opened. No sudden movements, just one hand reaching in, pulling out a thin leather case with practiced grace. He held it up between two fingers and extended it out the window, letting it catch the sunlight. A gold badge gleamed from inside the worn black leather. The silence that followed wasn't just still, it was shattering. The officers froze, not like men surprised, like men exposed. Malik let the silence stretch, just long enough for its weight to settle. Then he spoke. "Special Agent Malik Thompson," he said evenly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above them. The cicadas had quieted, as if they, too, were waiting for what would come next. Both officers stood still, staring at the badge. It had spoken a language they didn't understand. The one by the driver's side took half a step back, mouth parting slightly, his sunglasses slipping just enough for Malik to see the sudden flicker of panic in his eyes. "We didn't know," he stammered, the bravado draining from his voice. "You didn't mention that earlier." Malik tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. His voice stayed calm, but now carried the gravity of someone who had been forced to carry too much, for too long. "Would it have changed how you spoke to me?" The officer swallowed hard. "Look, we were just doing our job." Malik's expression didn't change. "Your job involves probable cause, reasonable suspicion, not racial profiling." The second officer cleared his throat, stepping forward. Now, voice overly eager. "It's just we had reports of a suspicious vehicle. You understand, suspicious." Malik cut in, finally letting a sliver of steel edge into his voice. "A man, alone, driving a car he owns, with no traffic violations? Or was it just that I didn't look like I belonged? The question landed like a hammer. The first officer shifted uncomfortably. His eyes dropped to the badge again, then to the ground, as if it might offer an escape. Malik didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of restraint, the kind forged through years of being underestimated, second-guessed, targeted, and told to stay quiet. You treat all citizens like this? He asked softly. Or just the ones who look like me? Neither officer answered. The silence was answer enough. Malik slowly returned the badge to the glove box, then leaned back in his seat, resting both hands again on the steering wheel, not because he needed to, but because the habit was bone deep now. I'd like your badge numbers, he said, almost politely. The second officer opened his mouth, then closed it. Now, Malik added, reluctantly. Both officers complied, scribbling the numbers onto a torn piece of ticket paper. They didn't look him in the eye. Malik took it, folded it once, then tucked it in his breast pocket. For a long moment, nothing was said. The tension had drained, but it left behind something heavier, a quiet reckoning. Finally, Malik spoke again. His tone had softened, but his gaze remained sharp. Not everyone you stop is going to be patient, or trained, or lucky. Remember that. He rolled up his window with slow finality, the hum of the glass rising like a curtain falling on an ugly play. The officers stepped back. Wordless. Malik eased the car back onto the road. The red and blue lights behind him faded in the rear-view mirror, replaced once again by the soft sunlight filtering through the trees. But this time, the cicadas did not resume their song. As Malik drove forward, the tires whispered against the road, the jazz still off, the silence in the car deep and deliberate. He didn't look in the rear-view mirror. He didn't need to. The two officers stood where he'd left them, still, small, now beneath the vast blue sky, as if the weight of what had just occurred was only beginning to settle on their shoulders. The kind of weight that doesn't show up in paperwork, but in late-night silences, in the reflection of your own face, when the uniform is off. Malik pulled into a quiet cul-de-sac a few blocks ahead and parked in the shade. He took out his phone, dialed a number with calm precision, and spoke a few words. Unit 547, traffic stop, requesting local supervisor. Possible misconduct. His tone was professional, controlled, devoid of emotion, but not of meaning. He hung up, exhaled again, and leaned his head back against the headrest, eyes closed for a moment, the thrum of his pulse finally beginning to slow. Minutes later, a different set of lights flashed behind him, blue, but not frantic. No sirens, no aggression, just procedure. The supervisor stepped out of the vehicle, a tall black woman in her 50s, her grey-streaked hair pulled tightly back, her uniform neat, her eyes sharp. Lieutenant Denise Caldwell. Malik recognized her instantly. They had worked together before. The nod they exchanged was brief, but layered with familiarity, with respect, with quiet understanding. She approached the driver's side, no clipboard in hand, no unnecessary questions. Agent Thompson, she greeted, her voice low, steady. You okay? Malik nodded once. I'm fine. Her gaze moved over him, then back to the direction he had come from. They're still at the scene? Yes, Malik said. I asked them to stay. No bitterness colored his tone, no rage boiled under his words. He didn't need it. The truth stood tall enough on its own. Caldwell nodded and spoke into her radio. A moment later, she turned and walked back toward the original scene. Malik watched through his side mirror as she approached the two officers. The one who had kept his hand too close to his gun stood with his head down, his shoulders, once stiff with authority, had slumped beneath the weight of exposure. His partner tried to speak, gesturing, offering explanations, but Caldwell's face remained unreadable. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Sometimes disappointment cuts deeper than rage. Malik sat still in the car, engine humming low. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. He simply waited, hands relaxed in his lap, posture composed. That had always been his weapon, composure, not because he lacked emotion, but because he understood the power of choosing when to reveal it. When Caldwell returned to his window, she looked tired, not physically, but in the way a person looks when they've seen the same story written too many times, just with different names and different uniforms. "I'll be filing a report," she said quietly, "and I'll make sure it doesn't get buried." Malik nodded, his expression unreadable. She hesitated, then added, "You handled it with more patience than most would have." "Than most could have." Malik finally spoke again. "I've had a lifetime of practice." The words landed softly, but they were heavy. A bird chirped somewhere in a tree above. A breeze stirred the leaves. The neighborhood, with all its curated calm and neatly trimmed hedges, didn't seem quite as peaceful anymore. Caldwell offered him a nod, respectful, unspoken solidarity between those who wear both a badge and a bird. And as her cruiser pulled away, Malik remained seated for another moment, letting the weight of it all wash over him. Not the incident itself, he had long stopped being surprised, but the echo of it. The way it lingered in the muscles, in the breath, in the memory. He looked at the folded ticket paper still in his breast pocket. Not a citation, just a badge, numbers, but it felt like evidence, not just of misconduct but of how close things had come to slipping into something irreversible. He reached across the console, turned the jazz back on. The music didn't burst in. It bloomed, soft notes cascading gently, washing over the silence like a bomb. The same saxophone, the same rhythm, but somehow it sounded heavier now, wiser. Malik placed both hands on the wheel again, not because he needed to, but because even now, the habit reminded him of who he was, of what it meant to move through a world where dignity is not given, but guarded. He drove away slowly, the sun now leaning toward late afternoon, casting amber light across the pavement. Behind him, the street faded, but what lingered wasn't fear. It was clarity. The road ahead stretched out beneath golden light, the sky melting into soft streaks of amber and blue. The storm had passed, not a storm of wind or rain, but of implication, of injustice wrapped in routine. The kind that comes without warning and leaves without apology. Inside the car, the jazz played again. Malik had turned the volume just high enough to feel the notes settle into the space around him. The gentle cry of a saxophone curled through the cabin like smoke, slow, thoughtful, healing. Each note seemed to reach into him, coaxing loose the tightness still lingering in his chest. His fingers tapped the steering wheel lightly, in rhythm now. Not out of habit, but out of reclamation. He had made it through again, but not unchanged. The scenery rolled by, familiar streets, grocery stores, fast food signs, children tossing a basketball on cracked pavement. Life went on, unaware that anything had almost happened, that something nearly irreversible had been waiting just one wrong move away. And maybe that's what struck Malik the most, how quiet it all was. The world didn't stop when justice was almost denied. It never did. He reached for his phone at the next stoplight and scrolled through his recent calls. He found her name, Amiri, and tapped. The line rang twice before her voice answered, bright and curious. "Uncle Malik, everything okay?" He smiled gently, the tightness in his jaw easing for the first time in an hour. "Yeah, baby girl. I just wanted to hear your voice." "Okay," she said with a small laugh. "You never call just to hear my voice." "What happened?" Malik hesitated. The light turned green. He eased forward. "I had a run-in with some officers," he said carefully. "A traffic stop. Unjustified." Her voice dropped instantly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "They're lucky it was me they stopped." Silence on the other end. "Then, you showed your badge." "I did." "And their reaction?" He let the question hang in the air, the weight of it needing no answer. He could imagine her face, brows furrowed, fists clenched. She'd always been passionate, always ready to fight injustice with fire. It's why she was going to law school, why she read court transcripts like novels and dreamed of dismantling systems one case at a time. But Malik had walked this path longer. He'd learned that fire consumes fast, that sometimes what lasts is water steady, persistent, and patient. He turned a corner, the sun catching the badge still resting beside him on the passenger seat. "I want you to remember something, Amira," he said. His voice was soft, but anchored with purpose. "Always stand tall. Let the truth do the heavy lifting." She didn't answer right away. And when she did, her voice had shifted, quieter, humbled. "I needed that," she said. He smiled again. "I figured." The call ended shortly after, but Malik kept thinking about her, about what she'd carry with her into courtrooms and offices and protests, about what he'd carried for decades and seen battles fought in parking lots and roadside stops, in boardrooms where his competence was questioned, and in elevators where eyes lingered too long and said too little. He had learned that power doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a calm voice. Sometimes it wears a well-pressed shirt. Sometimes it looks like silence that refuses to shrink. And sometimes, like today, it looks like a man choosing not to raise his voice, not because he's weak, but because he knows the strength of restraint. As the city blurred past his windows, Malik thought of all the others who hadn't been so lucky. The ones who reached for wallets and found bullets. The ones who answered questions and were never believed. The ones who stood tall and still fell. He drove not in victory, but in remembrance. At a red light, he glanced at himself in the rearview mirror. He didn't see a man defeated. He didn't see anger. He saw purpose. He saw a man who had stayed composed. A man who had refused to let anyone else narrate his story. A man who had shown the truth and let it speak for itself. The music shifted. Miles Davis, now mellow and reflective, and as he turned down the last road toward home, Malik thought of a truth he would pass down to every young soul who asked how to survive injustice without becoming hollow. Power doesn't always wear a uniform, and justice doesn't shout. It shows up, calmly, with the truth in its hand. Moral reflection. The world is quick to judge what it doesn't understand. It makes assumptions, casts shadows where there is light, doubts where there should be dignity. But men like Malik remind us, not every fight is loud. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is stand in silence and not back down, because in the end, it isn't volume that brings justice. It's truth, delivered with grace, and carried by those strong enough to hold it without hate.